Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. This is a webinar hosted by GMI Cloud and Gynger. It is called Accelerate AI Innovation and Amplify Growth. My name is Colin Mo. I am the host today. I am head of content at GMI Cloud. Joining me will be my coworker, Yujing Qian, who is VP of Engineering at GMI Cloud, and Amnon, who is CTO of Gynger. The topics we prepared for you today will be innovation, a little focus on the basics, but they're always worth revisiting and refining. Following that, Eugene will cover technical foundations and insights and tips to help startups get off the ground. Afterwards, Amnon will cover financial strategies to help startups and AI projects with limited budgets eke out every single bit of efficiency. There will be a 15-minute Q&A after our presentation where you can ask questions and we will do our best to answer, but there's also a Q&A box in the Zoom for you to drop questions as needed. Without further ado, I will get started with innovation. So let me start with a story, and this is a story we've heard many times at GMI Cloud, which is AI projects come in and we take a look at them and we see how they lost their way. A recent one was a startup project who is trying to build a little tool for personalized learning. And the first thing we noticed is that they lost their way. They lost their focus. And because they were chasing trendy AI features, such as Web3, blockchain, and other things that we didn't know why they were touching upon, and also touching upon infrastructure problems that they weren't ready for and weren't ready to scale for, and honestly did not have the resources and expertise to deal with. As a result, the result was always the same for each one we've seen, which is this drained resources and time, and morale was lost on the team, and they lost their focus and momentum. This cost them several months of budget and reduced their time to market, and ultimately they had to take a lot of time and resources to course correct. So what happened? They weren't laser focused on their vision, what they wanted to do, what their core competency was, and what their immediate value proposition was. We often have to help projects revisit, like, where are they trying to make innovation? Where are they trying to make an impact? And how are they going to get that to people faster and in a way that allows them to their core audience or their customers to see the value? We do tend to take a look and say, hey, if someone new saw your product right now, how long would it take for them to see, oh, I see what this is for, I know what it's trying to do, and I know why I would want to use it or pay for it. And then next was the infrastructure and costs associated with such a thing. Everyone knows you need infrastructure to run AI projects, but either you're building versus buying, which is a common debate. And oftentimes people get muddled in a mixture of trying to say, okay, well, I'm a developer and I do know that maybe this will cost me more in the long run. So maybe I should buy it now. And then they forget that they don't have the expertise or they need to hire that expertise to manage and constantly run the upkeep and upgrade cycle. We also see hyperscalers with questionable uh, pricing strategies to make you pay for their hours and not outcomes, which causes startups to blow up their budget and see ridiculous AWS bills and often cost them lots of runway. So bringing this back to the audience, if you're a founder, you probably remember your original elevator pitch. It's always worth revisiting it once a quarter. Are you still solving it? Have you moved on from it, or have you become distracted from your original elevator pitch? Oftentimes there's a pivot, but that pivot should still be hyper-focused. Then there's a tangible value. What I asked earlier still is worth revisiting. Is your audience able to see what you're trying to offer or what you're trying to do for them within minutes Or are you struggling to deliver that impact? For example, if ChatGPT took 10 minutes for each response, no one would ever use it, right? Then infrastructure alignment. Are you making the right choices for where you are now and where you will be in the near future? Because you can't plan for something that's far down the line if you won't exist at that point in time. And what I like to ask founders is if you had to double down on one thing today within your organization, what would it be? You should have that answer. You should know what is working. You should know why you want to double down on it and what the ROI is if you did. That's all I have for today. And I would like to pass it on to Eugene, who will cover the technical foundations.
Thanks, Colin. Hi, everyone. My name is Yujing, the VP of Engineering of GMI. So in the next session, I'm going to talk about a couple technical issues that we've seen, that we encountered, uh, that we found is very common for AI startups. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the more data equals smart AI fallacy. It's a very common misconception of the more data you got, you're automatically guaranteeing a smarter AI. I think everyone is aware of the word scaling law, and it is true in some way. And the latest AI models will require a lot of data to train, but we need to make sure that our data is clean and high accuracy. So the first thing people usually make mistake is they choose quantity over quality, which is false. Um, there are a lot of situations where you can find a lot of what we consider as free data set on the internet from somewhere else, from some unknown third party that can then claim to you that they have a proprietary data set that's really great. And people tend to just get those data sets or just crawl the way out and try to crawl everything from their target domain. But those kind of massive unstructured data set doesn't equal to a better AI. And your engineers will spend tons of time just to cleaning them. And sometimes it's just a pure waste of effort. Second, we want to try to avoid what we call a buffet syndrome. So we need to carefully pick the data set that's actually relevant to the task rather than throwing everything into your training job. We know the internet is already contaminated by AI after 2 years into what we consider as the era of LLMs. So the data curation is more important than ever before because if you don't pay attention to it, next time people ask your model like what it is and who built it, it will probably just answer it's OpenAI. The third thing is as the technology progress, especially with the emergence of reinforcement learning, I think people also need to think about what are the better alternative. For example, in order to avoid copyright laundering, do we really need that kind of domain specific data, or should we try to build them ourselves? Or if we move one step forward, should we consider other training alternatives like using reinforcement learning, where you can just build a sandbox and pick a right reward model? So it might actually work better than a data set that has a lot of copyright loopholes. The second thing I'm going to talk about is about the benchmark hustle problem. So on these days, one of the easiest way to evaluate the model performance is just through some kind of a benchmark, for example, Glue or Chatbot Arena. But we need to make sure that the benchmark can actually reflect the model's ability to answer the question we want to ask. We want to answer. For example, if people pick Arena, it's just more of evaluating model's capability when it comes to talking or discussion with people. But we know one thing we realize is when a lot of people is training agent, where the main focus is actually for it's to do function calls, to handle daily tasks, arena or glue score doesn't really mean much. So if people keep chasing on those famous benchmark, uh, it will fail inevitably. So picking the right benchmark is probably the most important when you start training your AI stack. Um, Another thing is we also need to be aware of this overfitting risk. Like I said, the internet right now is contaminated by all these AI generated content and all these leaked content as well. So models that excel in a benchmarks may be brittle in real world application because you never know if you are overfitting some of your eval data set because the data set was leaked somewhere or in some community or mixed up in some of your data set in the training. The Because of the sheer amount of data, it's kind of hard to detect this, I know. And that's why the community kinds to tend to another trend, which is going to a benchmark that's completely closed sourced, that nobody has access to. The third thing is real world focus for sure. So AI should solve practical problems, not just score well on tests. So when we first seen this mass AI adoption, we've seen what we consider as vertical models in a lot of domains like legal, healthcare, etc. But one thing we need to keep in mind is, for example, passing BART tests doesn't really mean the AI is already a good boy agent. No, it doesn't. It only means the AI has the knowledge and the trick to answer all these multi-selection questions. That's it. It doesn't mean it can help you to prepare the legal documentation you need. It can help you to review the legal documentation. It means nothing unless you specifically handcraft a benchmark that's suitable for the job you're aiming to. So yeah, score doesn't mean much. We've seen startups spend a tremendous amount of effort on this thing, and in the end, just figure, oh, our benchmark doesn't really reflect the capability. So better think about it before diving in. The third thing I want to talk about is what we call a ethical debt accumulation. This is relatively less popular, I would say, compared to the two previous topics, because as a startup, people usually tend to pay very low attention on ethical debt. But we want to mention it here because it has a long-term risk on your future business. Because cutting corners on data ethics can just create business vulnerability. I think people have heard a lot of those kind of scandals or PR disaster for either large corporations or mid-sized corporation in Gen AI domain. Um, and another word that we talked very often is GDPR, because if you don't pay attention to regulatory compliances and if you want to do your business in an area that actually has those things, you could be fined very severely. The third thing is there will be a reputational damage if the model you pushed online or your product released um, actually gives you an evidence that you are touching something that's non-ethical or uh, you have something that's not very compliant. For example, exposing somebody's real identity or just telling the user that this model wasn't built for you or something else. So those cut corners in the steps could eventually just outfire on yourself. So what we recommend startup to do is spend a reasonable amount of time and effort onto some proactive measures. For example, try to address all the bias or the consent in your dataset and be an ethical AI from the very start. Also in this process, I think explainability is very important. You also need to have the observability to your model as well in the early days. It doesn't really cost much, but still we need to pay attention to this. Now, let's take a step back and just give yourself a moment to think about, are you falling into these AI pitfalls? Are you trying to drink from a water hole, scanning all the data set available? Are you setting the right benchmark that would help you succeed rather than just give you an illusion that your model is really good? And are you accumulating any ethical debt in the process? So innovation isn't just about speed. It's about making smart, ethical, and sustainable choices from the very start. With that said, I'll pass the torch to Amnon. Amnon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Colin and Eugene. That was fascinating. My name is Amnon. I'm CTO for Gynger, and I'll talk now on the financial aspect of growing your AI startup and the things you need to think about. And as a start, I want to highlight two major things that are happening in the industry right now. And I'm speaking from a personal perspective. I myself been founding and growing startups almost for the last 20 years. So I have a little bit of perspective here. And what's happening with the huge AI revolution right now is the fact that as a CTO now, you probably on average spend 2 to 5x more on infrastructure than you used to spend. That's a huge change in the way you should think about how you grow your startup. It was 10, 15 years ago, 5 years ago, it was extremely easy and cheap to start pretty much anything. Storage is very cheap, compute was very cheap, but that's not the case anymore if you are an AI startup. And with that, there was something that was always there, but now it's hugely amplified problem, which is CTO and CFO don't really understand each other. So whatever the CTO does and spend money on is a complete black box from the CFO's perspective. And it was not a big deal when they didn't spend too much money. But now when 30, 40, sometimes 50% of the revenue or the total cash is going into AI infrastructure for those AI startups, suddenly the CFO being blind becomes a really big problem. And they can't really do their job, which is effectively going back to the board, going back to the company and say, this is how much cash, how much runway we have. And they can't really put the controls and the compliance that they put on, for example, the sales team and the go-to-market team when they build a model and help them to decide how, where should we spend money and where we should not. Now, with that, let me tell you maybe a little story. Again, from a personal perspective, I was brought by a board of a Series B company that was growing very fast, getting to the 20 million ARR mark. And they started to slow down. And that's the point where the board started to ask themselves, hey, we're going to run out of money. What's going on? Where are we spending all this money? And then they realized that 30% of the revenue is actually spent on this black box. All of this big IT infrastructure, AI infrastructure, they had no idea what's going on. So I helped them to kind of observe what's going on and give them some insight. So, and the first thing that occurred to me immediately, and it was that the fact that all of the technology leaders in the company then didn't have any seat at the table. And I'm saying at which table? I'm talking about the board table, the management table. They was just doing their own thing with the general message of grow at all costs, innovate, we're amazing, we're great, we're the smartest people in the world, we can build whatever we want. And they were not held accountable at all to the company goals, which obviously is related to, are we making money? How are we saving money and all of that? And And that was the starting point. So then I dug a little bit deeper and started to sit with all the technology leaders in the company, which again, nobody ever asked them about why they're spending money and what are they investing. And it was pretty obvious that so there were pretty obvious stuff that we could do that actually helped them to save. I'm not making it up, 90% of the budget. So they were throwing millions of dollars a year, and you could easily, it was pretty easy to cut 90% of them without really impacting the company's business. And a few things that are very common and were specifically happening in this case. So first and foremost, they had 5 core models that they spent tons of money first to buy very expensive data to train these models, secondly to just train these models, then inference. We could easily switch 4 of them into a foundational model that was by far cheaper. And so they didn't need to build their own models in most cases. Only one was really the core innovative thing, which Colin talked about. They should have picked only one thing that they really want to innovate on. The second piece is that these were people like me. They've been around. They used to buy everything from AWS. They never thought that you could get anything from anyone else. So they needed some GPU capacity, and they just bought it from the hyperscaler, in this case AWS. Turned out that it was extremely expensive, much more expensive than they should have spent for the same GPU capacity and setup. And they switched, and they first time in their life they bought something from someone else, which is not AWS on the IT infrastructure, one of the what we call neo clouds like GMI, and they could save 50% of their bill easily just by switching the vendor in this case, and changing the cloud strategy. And then the last thing is what obviously every company needs to do. They had a seat at the table every week. They had to explain why they're spending money and what they're spending, and put all the audits and all the kind of the monitors in place to make sure that they are aligned with the budget that the company can afford itself to innovate and build stuff. So that's all about the spend. But now I want to dedicate most of the time and the focus on a topic that is probably overlooked by most startups, which especially if you're more on the technical side, the CTOs of the world, which is the cash flow problem. And here the classic example is Jeff Bezos and Amazon. Obviously, one of the best companies ever created. And Jeff Bezos was very famous and always, growing at all costs. They were losing money for a long time until they became profitable, and they were pretty efficient too. Jeff Bezos is very famous for being always putting the money when he really needs to. But still, Amazon wouldn't exist today. They were very close to actually bankruptcy, to actually going out of cash. And there's a story like that pretty much for every big company that was very successful. And there's a lot of stories of companies that actually ran out of cash. Really good companies that could be really big, really successful. They were growing nicely. They didn't spend too much, but they didn't manage their cash flow well enough. They got into a cash crunch, and they didn't have the right luck to bring the right investor or the right debt at the right time. And therefore, managing cash, the cliche of cash is a king for startups is extremely, extremely important. So any cushion you can get on cash side is critical. And I, again, will speak from a personal perspective. I've been in those cash crunches many times with my startups, and it's extremely, it's extremely destructive to shift your focus on how the hell am I going to pay my sellers next month from how am I selling better or build a better product. So it's very, very disruptive to everything you do. And also what I realized is that I was always too late in looking for resources, for cash resources outside. You better get extra cash when you can. When you're in a good position, you get the best terms, the best lenders, the best investors, than when you're with your back against the wall. So taking care of cash is extremely important. And let me talk a little bit about how on the how side. So what are the tools, and what should you be mindful to actually make better decisions on cash and extend your cash runway and basically increase significantly the chances that your startup will make it to the next level. So there are 2 sides of it. And sorry for the academic course for maybe the technical people in the house here, is what you pay, what you spend. It's not just about how much you spend, it's about when are you going to pay the payments. And one very, very typical thing that, again, is being amplified in the AI era is the fact that your IT spend and your tech spend is not smooth. Like you have a lot of huge spikes. And think about the CFO that just been in a board meeting and told that the board that they have 3 months of runway until they really need cash. And boom, the CTO surprise was a $1.2 million bill from Amazon or from Google that was not expected. And then suddenly, oh, we actually have only 1 month of runway. This is devastating. So in the chart, you can see that if you've just been able to have a cushion and make sure that those spikes don't happen, then you can actually save that easily, and you can do that by using, for example, financing options where that allows you to always delay the cash spend further if one of these spikes happen, and then you have a very continuous and predictable, most important thing, predictable spend over time. And the second piece is that trying to find those contracts that allow you to pay over time. Now, that contradicts the idea of saving spend, because many vendors will come in and say, hey, if you pay me upfront, you can save 40 or 50% of your contract. And here what you can do is actually take the 40, 50% discount, but then use a financing solution that allows you at the back end break the payments into 12 months. And because you're buying something very valuable, the lenders out there, like Gynger, will give you really, really good terms because you're buying something that is very valuable and you can secure your kind of your loan against it. And the chart here shows that after 6 months of spend, there is extra $2 million every single month that you can push and extend. And every company can translate it to how many months it buys them until they really need to raise the next round or the next step. So that's the payable side. Now let's talk about something even bigger. If you're a company that already live on your own revenue and not just on raising money, which is the receivable side. And cash crunch is typical pretty much everywhere. So your clients are putting huge pressure on you probably to get payment terms, to pay you later, pay net 30, net 90, pay on a monthly basis. But the way your cost structure works is that you're probably spending a lot of the money upfront already. So that puts you in a really, really difficult position, again, from pure cash perspective. And if you look at the chart here, you can see that the green bar shows, your true booked revenue. So the committed revenue, committed cash that you could get from your clients, but they are holding back because they have better payment terms from you because they negotiated. But the red zone will say what actually you will collect. If you, for example, have a mix of some payment terms, net 90. It's a very typical example I took from one of our clients. So basically, over the year, which is what counts, you only collect 50% or less of the money you already have committed dollars to. And again, probably you're already spending tons of money. So by accelerating and advancing the cash, which is a solution that you can get in the market today, especially when you're selling AI and tech, GPU capacities, AI application and stuff like that, you can already ensure that you're collecting at least 80% of your receivable in advance. Just see the difference between the purple zone and the red zone, and understand how much cash, $4, $5, $6 million, we're seeing it over and over again, that you can add to your basically cash flow for the year that you really care about. So that's really the kind of things that are being overlooked and are critical given the huge spend that companies now have around AI. And with that, I'll just summarize and say again, new world, new era. CTOs and CFOs can't just do whatever they've been doing for a long time under the assumption that their cost is cheap, therefore they can give very flexible terms to their clients easily, or they can just pay the bill and just go with the one single big hyperscaler, AWS, GCP, Azure, and do what worked for them in the past. You need to rethink your financial strategy, and specifically both on the spend side and even more importantly on the cash flow side. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you for Amnon and Yujing. And now we are going to open the floor to Q&A. if there's any questions. Oh, there are 2 questions. Okay, so this first one is, what kind of trends in the AI space should founders be most conscious of in 2025? Amnon and Eugene, do either of you want to take on this?
Yeah, I can give my 2 cents regarding the technical aspect. Um, so in my opinion, 2025's AI space, one of the breakthrough might be reinforcement learning when it comes to domain adaptation. Um, when I say reinforcement learning, it means you can save up all these traditional SFT datasets. And if you can just tend to your production environment and try to make the agent work. I would say that's definitely one of the big thing we need to look. Another thing is video generations. I would say it's still trendy at this point. People might say 2024 is the year of video generation, but I would say 2024 is just the starting. We see a lot of booming applications and a lot of better models and tools for creators to use. So this video generation is definitely another things we need to take a look at.
Amnon.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'll add kind of the market and financial perspective here. Just like every time we had like a major breakthrough in technology and a huge hype justified, not just a hype, it's like a true reason to throw tons of money and VC money into young companies that who knows if they will make it or not, and create also huge competition. Like there's basically on every aspect of business or consumer, you probably have 10 startups at least that got pretty well funding from VCs trying to chase after this use case and bring the AI benefits into it. So with so much money thrown into the market, probably next year, towards the end of the year, we will see a lot of companies running out of steam. Not because the AI is just a hype, it's just because usually that's what happens. Like 1 out of 10 will make it. So we'll see tons of roll-ups. We'll see companies trying to get together, companies getting into their end of cash and trying to figure out how to make it to the next level. So it will be extremely active late stage, growth stage, private equity market that we will see. And with that, again, a lot of financial activity and lending and debt and all this stuff will come into life. So the honeymoon will be over for many, many companies that just started in the last 1 or 2 years. And it will be interesting to see, and add to that the macro environment, which one thing you can tell, it's probably very volatile right now, very uncertain. So people, we'll see how it influences the financial markets.
I have a follow-up for this question for the 2 of you, which is if you could say for the audience, what's one thing you should be doing to take advantage of this trend? And what's one thing you should be very scared of doing or should be thinking about? Like if you're doing it, it's probably a red flag and it may have made sense last year, but it doesn't make sense this year. Do you have any observations like that?
I'll let Eugene give him 2 minutes to think about, because I'm going to repeat what I pretty much said consistently. I'll say it not just as an observer, not just as someone like as Gynger who works with companies that starting to think about their cash flow and run into those challenges, but also as a founder myself who's done these mistakes. But it's extremely easy to become over optimistic and not do the right thing because of the hype. And sometimes your own investors or sometimes even are not disciplined enough, and they feel it's a huge race and they just encourage you to spend too much, or they just say money is not a problem. And it's never true. It's never true. It's the oxygen of every startup is your cash, is your money. And what's true today is not true in 6 months. There's a macro uncertainty. There's a huge competition out there. Even the technologies, and I'm sure Eugene will highlight, changes immensely every month. It's both the cost structure of things and the infrastructure and what you can do, and every time you get surprised by another thing. So just be a smart hedge fund manager that value the uncertainty as a big factor, and be extremely cautious on all the stuff we discussed today, spend and cash flow in particular.
Thank you, Amnon. Eugene, do you have an answer for what's something technical that people should be doing to take advantage of trends or should be scared of doing, and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
doesn't make sense?
yeah. So one thing I would recommend is definitely try out the new tech, especially the new reasoning models through an APIs or try to host it by yourself. Um, and maybe try to keep their capability first, before going back to the old fine-tuning or training way. Definitely, to leverage this new reasoning regime, I would say. So what we figure out is a lot of existing jobs can now just be handled by those vanilla out-of-box models, versus previously a lot of jobs are still needing some fine-tuning in order to be able to do it. So yeah, definitely look more into this reasoning models. Try APIs, try prompt engineering before you ever start doing training.
Okay, thank you. So that question has been answered. The next question is probably for Amnon, which is you highlighted how some AI startups overspend on infrastructure without a clear ROI model. What are some early warning signs that a company is heading towards unsustainable tech spend, and how can finance leaders intervene before it's too late?
The number one early warning is that there's no uh, real that the tech leaders are not held accountable financially. It's
Accountable.
because every company has its own ROI kind of model, and innovation is always hard to put in the ROI box. I completely understand that, but it still can be. And if the tech leaders are not financially minded and they're not putting in under a clear budget. And I know the word budget sounds very weird to around eight companies that just raise money and there's just in a huge race to build stuff. But it's every company that doesn't manage the financial aspects of innovation, just the way they always do it from day one on the sales side. Like they think about sales comps tremendously, and it all gets into the financial metrics, and they manage it very, very carefully because they know how it scales and know how it works. But a company that doesn't do the same for the innovation side, this is a huge early warning because almost for sure it will go out of hand because the technologies will just be carried away with their optimism. There's always, as CTO of many years, there's always an extra thing that you need to do that you didn't anticipate. The uncertainty is there, especially with the AI. So we'll always find yourself need more resources, time, money, people than what you anticipated to build a mature product. It's however, I'm always trying to hedge and I'm always over optimistic about how much I need to deliver something. And if you're not forced to a framework where you need to think why you're justifying, predict, forecast, do all the things that a CFO will do when they think of everything else, any other resource that they spend. It's a huge early warning that this company is not on the right track, probably.
Okay, I like that answer, but I also have a different question, and this one's for Eugene, which is because Eugene's on the other side, which is very related, which is as a tech person, what are the best ways you can, I'm sure you've encountered situations where you want to spend something and then the finance people come in and they're like, well, how is the spending going to work? So Eugene, do you have any advice or tips and tricks for the other CTOs or VPs of engineering on how you can better explain or justify or think about justifying certain spends so that you can better highlight, hey, this is actually needed. I'm not blowing, you know, I'm not trying to blow up the budget. This is needed. I'm not, doing all
Yeah.
this CapEx for something stupid.
Well, that's a really good question. First, I want to say, like, just put it things in number. Um, for example, how much the span is roughly is, and what is the expected outcome, from maybe from different aspects. Like, what is the expected revenue growth if we have this kind of capex? For example, if we train a model, what is the expected improvement, and then what is the expected revenue growth? I will say, even from a technical standpoint, the tech person should have a rough number in mind about what it actually means to company's finance. Even you don't know the model, you can like ask somebody else for help for sure, but uh, we need to visualize what it looks like for the company rather than just chasing for a huge budget and say, oh, this is gonna work. I mean, that will not persuade anybody, and it's just not good for the team either.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
will
fair.
add one thing. So yeah, I'll add one thing, which is CTOs don't do what Eugene just said, which is take the time to actually forecast how much it will cost. I will say you need to do even double. You need to do the same for at least 2 scenarios or 3 scenarios, because there's always more than one way to do stuff. And I knew I was lazy. I needed a vendor. I just took the vendor and say, okay, AWS, I know that's what it's cost. Fine. I tell the CFO I think it's 3K a month, and I need this. But if they ask, okay, do you have an alternative? Then I need to work pretty hard to think what is the alternative. And I think today, because again the spend is much bigger, this is really necessary. You need to be very truthful for yourself when you do this other scenario, that it's a viable scenario, just to make it up to make your preferred scenario look good. There's always, as we all know, people that build solutions to stuff, at least two ways to accomplish things that are very different, probably.
Yeah, I do something like that too, where I go, if I have no budget, if I have what I expected as a budget, and if I have unlimited budget. And then I present that to the
Correct.
decision maker, and then they get to
Perfect.
say, okay, here's what the expected outcome is for each. And they get to
Yes.
slide it. Uh,
It
yep.
creates a really, really good discussion, both with the technologists, by the way, that they say, hey, we can reach this milestone, 80% of it much quicker, by the way, which is always a good choice for a startup. And then, of course, to the CFO as well.
Sweet. Thank you for both. There's two more questions I see in the question pool. So the next one is, when evaluating tools and strategies for growth, how should we balance cost effectiveness with long-term scalability?
Uh, I'll I'll jump in. My experience told me uh, solve the problems that are tangible and are short and midterm now as a startup, because then you buy your ticket for the longer term and then you solve the bigger problem. So I fell for this too many times where I built things that were probably correct and like more scalable and more, something that will take advantage of next year or 2 years down the road if we build it right. And things are so dynamic and changes both the requirements are changing, what brings the money, what things change so much that usually every dollar you spend on something that will happen in a year or 2 years down the road is probably not optimized. Now, it's not always true. I want to be careful. These are kind of high level insights, but I think there's a bias for good engineers and good problem solvers to think a little bit too much ahead and a little bit overlook on details and the small things that they can optimize on what they are delivering right now. So that's kind of my 2 cents in this sense.
Okay. Eugene, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I strongly agree. Um, so right now, I would say for a startup, we will only encourage people to focus on long-term scalability only in their mind or when they do the design. So the design need to leave room for long-term scalability for sure. We don't want to shutter it down for the future, but uh, the actual implementation should always be short or midterm. Means on a cost effectiveness side.
Okay. Thank you for the question answers and for the question as well. And then this is probably our last one. Which channels are worth investing in and which channels were a waste in time? I'm not entirely sure what channels mean specifically here, but if that means anything specific to YouTube, I'm happy to give you guys the floor. I guess to maybe hyper focus the question, maybe for Eugene, it would be probably which channels regarding the technical channels, such as infrastructure, application layer, model layer, stuff like that. And for Amnon, it might be channels such as how you want to the company to think about channels
Financing
of
channels. Yeah.
funds, spending, and stuff like that. That might be the question.
Hmm.
Hopefully that's the question to whoever asked this.
Yeah, okay. From a technical standpoint, I would say it really depends on what's the nature of the company and what's the nature of the business. Like if you're a consumer-facing startup, then you probably want to focus more on actual AI applications rather than the infrastructure and let somebody else to take care of it. But if you are a, I don't know, to business rather than to consumers, then you probably need to pay more attention or effort to your own infrastructure because scalability or enterprise trustworthy is something you need to pay more attention to. So it really depends on the situation you are in, I would say. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll take the question where I want to take it to. So, if you talk about funding and financing channels, in the early stage startup plan, you first raise. Some of them are complete bootstrap and they don't raise any money. But let's say that you do need to raise money, then you raise from obviously equity, VC rounds, and all that. But then slowly you get to the point where you ask yourself, what's next? Should I raise debt, which is not dilutive? I'm not going to give any percentage in ownership from my company, but it may be a little costly because I need to pay it back with interest. Or should I get additional equity round, which means I bring uh, more, I dilute myself, I reduce my ownership percentage, and I bring more stakeholders to the table that are usually very active. And sometimes they help, sometimes they create more complication. And then when you talk about debt, traditionally it was just venture debt. Like it was a specific way of taking a few millions of dollars from Silicon Valley Bank and some others, which many founders found to be very cumbersome, and they didn't like this path. It's taking a lot of the focus and taking some of the independence of the managing your strategy as a company. And yeah, and I think today there's more alternative debt options out there that founders, CTOs, CFOs should consider from earlier stages. And it's not the same venture debt that they used to, maybe they got to know or heard from their investors. And again, because they need to spend much more infrastructure, it's like the good old hardware startups that before you can sell anything, you need to spend so much. Probably there is a new rise of the debt side of the house over just taking more and more financing around it from your investors.
All right. Thank you for that insight. I appreciate it. I believe that is our last question. If there are any more questions, you have a few more minutes to drop them in to the Q&A panel. As for the raffle, we will be doing it offline to protect personal privacy. We don't want to announce that live. But the winner of the raffle will be emailed tomorrow morning. And if you are a startup, GMI Cloud is happy to buy out your GPU credits from AWS or GCP. Please reach out to us after the webinar to find out how. And of course, our wonderful folks from Gynger would love to talk to you about finance. I think that is all we have because I don't see any question in the Q&A channel. So thank you everyone for attending our webinar.